wonderful to see such a great turnout tonight. Seeing so many people tonight highlights how important this conversation about data centers is to our community. So thank you for taking the time to be here with us tonight. I wish I could take credit for this, but someone far smarter than me came up with the idea. Commissioner Zemas recognized the need for creating an open forum to ask and answer the question, what do we do about data centers? So a special thank you to her, Commissioner Ress, and Commissioner Pace for their leadership in making this happen. I also want to thank the Tuscarawas County Economic Development Corporation, the Montrose Group, the Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District, the Farm Bureau, the New Philadelphia Police Department, and Kent State Tuscarawas for their contributions to the evening. Not only is Kent State providing us with a venue, they're also making sure folks at home can enjoy this online. Now, before we begin, I want to make sure your questions are heard. Our goal here is to provide expert information and to make sure your questions about data centers are part of the process. As you can see highlighted on the agenda, you can use the index cards in the boxes at the back of the auditorium to submit your questions for our panel discussion. Just make sure you drop your card in the box prior to 7 p.m. and make sure you write legibly. Bringing an event like this together is a team effort. It is my absolute privilege to have my former colleague at the TCEDC, John Kelly, helping host this event. John is going to help us move from speaker to speaker, and I will collect your questions to prepare to moderate our panel discussion. Please welcome our host for the evening, John Kelly.
Good evening. Is it, I guess, Happy National AI Day? I don't know. So, I do work with Tuscarawas County Economic Development Corporation, where JC used to work. And I just want to say that at this point, Tuscarawas County has not had any serious looks from data centers. Okay, we haven't had any real leads. But many of you know that contiguous counties around us are getting them or having serious conversations about them. So I'm just hoping that we become more well-informed about them because it's probably coming. And you know, many of us are using AI on a regular basis. So this is an issue that we have to think about and maybe plan for. I'm hoping we get some balanced information that will help us in the future as we make decisions. So my role is mainly to introduce the speakers, and I'll be reading the bios for each. First up is Craig Butler. He serves as the Chief Executive of the Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District, MWCD, an organization that manages Ohio's largest watershed with a mission to prevent flooding, conserve natural resources, and promote outdoor recreation. The MWCD owns nearly 60,000 acres and 16 dams and reservoirs across eastern Ohio, which its 450 employees manage in partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. MWCD's recreation resources serve approximately 5 million Ohioans annually, and its flood prevention mission is calculated by the Corps of Engineers to have prevented more than 10 billion in property damage since the MWCD's inception. Butler is a long-time Ohio natural resources and environmental leader, having previously served in senior positions under 2 governors' administrations, including in the governor's cabinet as director of the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. At OEPA, Butler led the agency's 1,200 scientists, engineers, and administrative professionals in protecting Ohio's environment, while building a culture that supported economic development and job creation. Under his leadership, the agency also developed initiatives that serve as national models regarding climate change, drinking water standards, and watershed protection strategies. Prior to joining MWCD, Butler led the Power Siting Board for the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, where he worked to streamline the approval process for new power generation, initiated an overhaul of the board's governance, and helped improve the consistency of the board's siting process. Butler holds a Bachelor of Arts in Geography and Environmental Studies from Mansfield University in Pennsylvania, and a Master of Science in Environmental Studies from Ohio University. He lives in Tuscarawas County with his family, where he enjoys hunting, fishing, and endurance running. I welcome Craig Butler.
John, thank you for the introduction. Good evening. JC, thank you. Appreciate everybody attending. I know we've got a lot of elected officials in the room, so I'm just going to blanket and globally say thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. And then I'm going to move over here because I'm a mover and I've got the clicker, so I think I can make this work. So I think when asked about participating on the panel, first I thought, why me? And then I said, I think there is some relevance here that is really worth talking about. You think I'm going to do a little short overview of the Conservancy and the work that we do in our conservation space, and really talk about one issue that is often talked about in terms of data centers, and in many ways I think improperly talked about or misrepresented, is about water. And so that's one thing we know a lot about, and we often use our water from a flood perspective, as John mentioned, preventing billions of dollars of economic impact from flooding across the region. But we also manage water for economic development. We sell water. And while we have not been approached from a data center perspective, we know that that's likely to come, because if the data center is moving into a surrounding county or even Carroll County, they will need significant resources of water. And I think we want to be sure that we talk about how we evaluate water and how we look at water sales as well as economic development in the region, just so you know that. And then I will talk a little about data centers, both from a Conservancy perspective, and then I'm sure during the roundtable, I can take my MWCD hat off and just talk about it from a perspective from some of my past experience. So as you know, this is us. This is the Conservancy, everything from the Dover Dam up in the right or left-hand corner, down to me holding my favorite fish, which is a nice large muskie off of Leesville Lake, and everything in between. So we are, our mission statement, if you will, that we're responsible stewards dedicated to providing benefits for flood reduction, conservation, and recreation in this watershed. This watershed is huge. If you know it, you know it's big. It's 8,000 square miles. To orient yourself, I would say start down here at the bottom, which is Marietta, go all the way to the top, which is near Akron, over to Ashland, Richland counties, and Mansfield, swing over by Buckeye Lake, and come on back to Marietta. That is the Muskingum watershed. It is our jurisdiction. We cover all the parts of 27 counties. We have jurisdiction in 18 of those. And the heart of it is this idea of 16 dams and reservoirs that were interconnected, designed and built after the 1913 flood. If you have done any history and seen any history about the 1913 flood, you know how devastating that was. And there are still reminders of it today. Go to the Lafayette Hotel in Marietta. They're really proud of their flooding in Marietta. You got to find the highest watermark that you can find there. That's for the 1913 flood. But there was really devastation across the watershed. And that really then brought some thought leaders together. Governor Cox at the time, Governor Cox was the mayor of Dayton prior to that, which was very fortunate. And they started having a conversation about flooding, saying every few years we cannot have our towns and cities just devastated and have loss of life as well as economic disruption. Well, at the time, NCR, National Cash Register, was probably like a Google-ish company of today in terms of what their economic impact was nationally and internationally. They were demanding that they do something in the Dayton region around flooding. It really grew this idea of a Conservancy district. They actually passed a law called the Von der Heydt Act that created these things called Conservancy districts, and I will just tell you, there is nothing like this construct anywhere else in the world. We are a municipal government in the shape of that, 8,000 square miles. We're also a corporation. We're independent, we're created by state statute, the General Assembly, but we're not funded by the state, we're not funded as a state agency, we run and operate as a business. And so that's how we have a lot of opportunity to do some really cool things. And one of them is, you know, we lead a dynamic organization still to this day after 94 years, focused on flood control, conservation, stewardship, recreation for sure if you've been to our parks, and then community partnerships. I'll talk about the 16,000 acres that covers our reservoirs, and the system contains over 68 billion gallons of water. Caveat that, we can hold a 30% more than that. These reservoirs were built and interconnected over a 6-year period, designed to hold 25% more water than the 1913 floods that came through the region. It was designed specifically to stop catastrophic flooding. And when you'll often see a picture where, after 2005 flood, the Wilkshire Golf Course near Bolivar and the interchange in I-77 was flooded. People say that we failed. And I say, that's exactly what we were supposed to do. We're supposed to hold water in areas where we have less impact to protect human life and resources where you don't. And so we take that really seriously. But we also have the 68 billion gallons of water. And in a data center construct, we know that people are going to come and ask us to talk about water sales and water use. And so I want to talk to you about how we look at ecological concerns, impacts aquatic life, reduced water availability during low flow periods. Basically, our reservoirs provide a controlled and sustainable alternative to taking water out of our streams, whether it's for a data center or for an oil and gas operation. And we manage these withdrawals to minimize the environmental disruption. I'll just take you through our process. So if somebody wants to buy water from us, there are some certain state regulations that they need to follow. So we basically, if we have somebody that wants to purchase water from us from an industrial or economic development perspective, we can only sell them 2 million gallons of water a day. But we can do it over an extended period of time, a 30-day period or maybe a 60-day period. And so we will often write a contract that says for an oil and gas operation, we'll sell 2 million gallons a day for a 30-day period, can't take more than 60 million gallons a day total. That sounds like a lot of water. It is a lot of water. But when we compare it to the water that we hold in the reservoir, for example, Tappan Lake holds about 7 billion gallons. Atwood's about 6. Seneca's about 13, because it's the third largest lake that we have in the state of Ohio. We wanted to make sure that if somebody comes and asks us for water, whether it's a data center or a municipal water supply or an oil and gas operation, that we did an independent evaluation of that. So back in 2010, we contracted with the U.S. Geologic Survey and said, if we took all of that water out that I just mentioned all at once, not over a 30-day or 60-day period, we just took it instantaneously out of the lake, and didn't think about any recharge. You know, it didn't rain, we didn't get groundwater recharge, we didn't have streaming flow. What's the impact on the lake? Because our primary concern at that point is protecting the recreational resource, so we're not impacting recreational users on the lake or other municipal water users that use it for public water supply. That answer came back. It startled me a little bit, but it came back and said, 3 sheets of notebook paper. So we'd lower the lake 3 sheets of notebook paper if we took all of that water and just not replaced it at any point in time. That gave us some real opportunity to think about, should we sell water? Gave us some real baseline, credible baseline data, independent analysis to say that we can protect the resource and be able to be a resource for economic development by using the water that's in our reservoir. This is the process that we go through. We look at locations, we look at water depth, seasonal conditions, and in 2024 was the first time that we actually told somebody to stop. Atwood, we had a severe drought situation. We were seeing Atwood Lake in particular go down about 1,000ths of an inch a day. We were losing about 1 million gallons of water through evaporation. And we were getting dangerously close for the sailboats with deep keels not be able to get out of the water. And so we did an advisory and said, you probably ought to get your boat out, because if you don't, it's not going to come out, number one, and we will help you do that. But number two, we had some water withdrawals at Atwood Lake that we just told them that they had to stop. They had to find an alternate source of water, or they needed to stop doing what they were doing. So we've pressure tested it from the research standpoint, but we also pressure tested ourselves to say, would we, when we were pressured and needed to, would we make them stop? And the answer is yes. From a water quality perspective, we have a very robust conservation program. You probably have seen something like this if you driven past the Atwood Dam recently, or even the Tappan Lake Dam, but now these are in all of them, these water quality buoys that send real-time information every 2 minutes to our website and to our conservation staff. And we're monitoring all of these water quality provisions. And then we also have other additional monitors. We're working with the Cleveland Water Alliance to put even some additional monitors at Tappan Lake, so that we're collecting real-time, again, baseline information, not necessarily about quality, but water quantity, or not quantity, but water quality. And so we also got thinking about research. We're a public entity, and we wanted to be, how do we support research in the watershed for questions that we have, or questions that you have, or questions that researchers have that we haven't been able to get answered. So we set up this research network, called the Research Collaborative. We brought the universities together from across the region and said, help us build a construct and find the questions that need answered. We will fund that. And so now we have a partnership with the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio. And the gift that we made to them was $10 million for them to solicit grants based on the issues that were raised by us and the researchers. And then we're just starting this year to award grants for research in our watershed to help inform questions that you have, that we have, about protecting our lake. It could be water quantity, it could be water quality, it could be shoreline conservation, it could be even about aquatic insects or fish. But there's a lot of questions that just we need answers to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So this is just a snapshot of a lot of the things that we spend our time working on in the conservation space. So it could be as simple as tire collections, or debris removal programs. We have a grant program that works with municipal governments across the entire watershed, where if you have a debris in your log jams that need removed to help improve flow, culverts and break placements, we can give grants for those. Stream cleanups, floating wetlands over here in the bottom right-hand corner. One of the things that just vexes us is we put our docks in and the geese just love them. And you know what they like to do when they're standing there too. So we said, let's try to kill a couple of birds with one stone. So we built these floating wetlands. The geese love those. They'll hang out in there. It's protection, bit of habitat. They do whatever they do in there. And it also helps wave erosion along the shoreline. And so that's about as cheap as it gets in terms of how you put that together. It has a really big impact. So now we're taking that as one of those research projects that we've funded to help inform us on things that we can do, not just from a geese perspective, but also a conservation perspective. So it's projects like that are relatively cheap that make a real difference. We also have purchased thousands of acres of property in and around Coshocton, and it's with Western Reserve Land Conservancy. We have a great partnership with them. They identify, particularly American Electric Power strip ground, that American Electric Power is selling. They will work a deal with American Electric Power. The State Office of Public Works and the Green Space Preservation Program will actually give a grant to pay for that land. They don't want to hold it, so they donate it to us. We then incorporate it back into our lands and then keep it open to the public. So we build trails on some of those properties. We leave it open mostly for hunting. And we're also working on mineland reclamation, acid mine drainage, orphan well plugging in those areas. These areas are really wild. They were unreclaimed. They were done before pre-law mining, 1974, when they didn't have to reclaim the land after they strip mined it. And so you may walk along and then all of a sudden you're on the precipice of a 100-foot drop off into a high wall mine. And so it's a little scary, but there are some really, really beautiful places there. And so it's just an opportunity for us to continue our water quality preservation project. So I spent some time doing some research and working with the Ohio Chamber as they put together their study on commercial research relative to data centers. And if you haven't read this study, I would encourage you to do it. There's a few pieces here that I'm going to pull out. But, on issues like this that generate a lot of public attention, there's a giant amount of misinformation. There are concerns here that we need to be careful and watch about. But there are also some really credible pieces of information, of which I think this is one. So some key highlights that I was mentioned. This is a huge economic driver in the state of Ohio. Ohio is one of the top 5 states for data centers across the country. We've emerged as this North American leader on data centers. Here's the job impacts in terms of as jobs as well as economic impact. It is literally billions of dollars. Now, I'm not saying that you only chase the dollar, but you want to do it and you want to make sure from an environmental and from an ecological perspective that it's balanced. And I think when you look at data centers in terms of energy intensity, yes, they require a significant amount of electricity. They've been doing some things. PJM, the interconnection across the region that delivers power in this region, announced another 25 gigawatts of power and power connection today. And so they're taking real strides. Congressman Balderson has passed some work in Congress to move projects up in the queue, if you will, so that they can do transmission projects quicker and faster to move transmission and power around. So there's a lot of attention in this space around power, not only just in power usage, but also with the executive order 14318, which is required if you're going to build a data center, you need to bring your power with you. And that is either on-site, building your power generation behind the meter to supply that, or you're making arrangements to say you're not passing along the infrastructure improvement costs to consumers to pay for the power at the data center. So water, certainly water is a concern. Sometimes it really depends on the type of data center you have. There are hyperscale data centers that are massive, and there are some that would fit probably in the size of this room. It just depends on what their objectives are. But water and water use is emerging as certainly a prime consideration. If you had any opportunity to look at the Columbus Dispatch over the past couple of days, they wrote an article. They've been doing a lot of research about data use from, or water use from data centers. They wrote the article, and then I think more importantly, they did an editorial a couple of days later that gave it actually appropriate context. I think the article was that they use 1.3 billion gallons of water, or something to that effect. Do you remember, Tim? Is that it? I can't remember. It's like 1.3 billion gallons of water over the last 12 months, data centers in the Columbus region. Sounds like a lot of water. It is a lot of water. Put that in context, it's 3% of the amount of water that the city of Columbus generates. And then they go on and put a whole lot of other context to that number. So one, you don't diminish it, but two, you put all this data and numbers in context before you form a judgment around whether or not we think that you should have data centers here in Tuscarawas County or not. Like I said, we have not, and John had mentioned earlier, that we at Tuscarawas County have not had somebody knock on our door necessarily asking for water for data centers, but we know it will come. We know that we would evaluate a request from a data center based on the principles that we've already said about water use and water demands across the district. We probably would do some independent analysis of that based on the water withdrawal request, see if it impacts the ecological or recreational resource that we have to make sure that we're not. It's really about balance for us. The old Teddy Roosevelt saying of it's really about wise use, and so we focus on that. So who are we today? This is us today. So tried and true, the Dover Dam. That's the only concrete dam in the system. It stands there as a sentinel for flood control, but we do lots of other things. The recreational mission certainly has come a long way, but we certainly don't abandon our conservation roots either. And with that, we'll wait for questions, I think, John, or are we taking them now? Okay, thank you all.
Yeah, we'll do the questions later when, after all three of you have presented. All right, next up is Matt McAllister. Matt is Senior Director of Economic Development with the Montrose Group. Matt brings over 25 years of economic development service to clients at the Montrose Group, and he serves clients with strategic advisory services for data center development, corporate site location, development of public-private partnership for communities and developers, economic development advising and planning for communities, and working with regional economic development organizations on competitiveness initiatives. Prior to joining the Montrose Group, Matt served as interim president for One Columbus and held several other leadership positions at One Columbus, including executive vice president and senior vice president of economic development, helping guide business retention and expansion efforts, domestic and international investment, and the regional competitiveness strategy. His tenure contributed to One Columbus's long-standing reputation as one of the nation's leading economic development organizations. Matt was named a top 50 economic developer by Consultant Connect in both 2016 and 2024. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of South Carolina. I give you Matt McAllister.
Thank you.
So just a little bit about the Montrose Group. Thanks for the introduction. Basically, we're an economic development consulting and advising firm. And we also work predominantly with communities, but we also represent companies, developers. We'll represent communities. We won't represent developers and communities that we're representing, but we represent housing developers, industrial developers, data center developers, all sorts of development. And we can work on both sides of the deal depending on who contacts us. We also do strategic planning. We've done over 60 strategic plans for communities. We have about 4 or 5 underway right now. We also do lobbying. I'm not a lobbyist, I'm not a registered lobbyist, but we have 2 registered lobbyists on our team as well that can lobby on behalf of a community or a company. So, what is a data center? I'm going to start with a caveat. I'm going to give you my perspective. I'm not here to espouse the benefits or virtues of a data center. I'm here to tell you how you can actually structure a deal if you want to do a deal with a data center in the most productive way. And I'll give you some examples along the way of what I mean there. But I can tell you, not every community is right for a data center. Just like every data center is not right for the community. So I'd like to start with just that caveat because I think it'll give you an idea where my perspective is coming from. So what is a data center? I'm going to focus on just the bottom point here. There's really 4 kinds of data centers. There's hyperscalers, which is the one that we'll probably talk about the most today, and co-location data centers. But there's also enterprise-level data centers. These are data centers that are typically operated by a company. You'll hear me refer to Columbus Region a lot because I was with Columbus, Columbus for 15 years. Before that, I was with the Greater Columbus Chamber of Commerce for 10 years. So I did economic development in that region for 25 years. I can tell you, we had a lot of co-location centers before the hyperscalers ever came in. Companies like Nationwide Insurance, who's headquartered there, they had a data center there. Citibank has a data center there. Discover Card has its data center there. These are company-owned data centers. They only do company-related work, and they can be anywhere from, say, 25,000 square feet up to maybe 200,000 square feet. At least they are in our region. And so that gives you an idea of what an enterprise-level data center is. Then there's edge data centers. These are data centers that are typically, they require an ultra-low latency. So think of this. When you hit return on your search, the amount of time it takes to get a response back, that's the latency. And these are things like stock transactions, require ultra-low latency. So there's all kinds of services. These are typically smaller data centers. They might be servicing a company or they might be an edge data center that has a lot of different clients in them. But they are all focused on ultra-fast responses. And then co-location data centers are typically, they can be confused with hyperscalers a lot of times. They're typically fairly large buildings, but inside you'll have multiple customers. They'll actually have cages inside of them. And you'll have people that rent out maybe 500 square feet or 50,000 square feet. You'll have all kinds of different individuals. And then there's obviously hyperscalers. These are the Googles, the Metas, AWSs, Microsofts, Oracle, Apple. They all have these large data centers that are basically servicing some places clients, but in many cases their own services, like Apple, your iCloud. Those are all stored on an Apple data center. And that would be a hyperscaler. So, why do we need data centers? I think most people think of these top 2 reasons. Social media and streaming. That's what we hear most. That's the biggest use of data centers. Well, it's not really, but that's what a lot of the perspective is. There's all sorts of uses for data centers that are critically important to our everyday lives. Just a quick show of hands. How many people use MyChart? It's all operated off a data center. All of your records are stored in a data center. It's critically important that the doctors have access to them. How many people are amazed now that they actually get their lab results at the same time their doctor sees them in their MyChart? That's amazing. That is something that is done by a data center. It's housed in a data center. Your doctors accessing your x-rays in a data center. So it's not like it used to be where they used to actually transfer records to your doctor. Your doctor's doing everything on a data center. There's all kinds of different examples here. Life sciences, AI has dramatically decreased the time for drug discovery, taking years off of the practice of drug discovery. We have, emergency services and hospital services. We have credit card, debit payments. You used to move those over a copper line. They don't really move over copper lines anymore unless they don't have access to Wi-Fi in a data center. So most of those are transacted through a data center. Airline reservations, national security. If data center goes down, you're probably not going to fly anywhere because they aren't going to be able to access the records to verify who you are. So those are just a few examples of why data centers are critically important. And I don't think a lot of people understand in that context that we're using data centers every day. Actually, learned a fact. I hope I'm not stealing your thunder. But heard today that the average home accesses 2 data centers 24 times a day.
That's correct.
The average home accesses 2 different data centers at least 24 times a day, 25 times a day. And that's because you have things like Ring doorbells, Blink cameras, you might have a Nest thermostat. They're all accessing cloud. They're all being controlled by the cloud. All right. So there are benefits to data centers as well, beyond that. This is just a couple examples of recent announcements. Once you have a density of data centers, which we clearly have in Ohio, you can start to attract supply chain companies as well. Vertiv, Westerville-based company. They're going to add 730 jobs. Most of them in southeastern Ohio, by the way, along the river in Lawrence County. So that's one of the large operations where they are developing their rack systems and their UPC systems that go into data centers. Their growth is specifically because of the growth in data centers. Same thing with 1,000 jobs, Corning. That's Corning. They do fiber optic cables. They got a deal with AWS. A deal with AWS. They're going to add 1,000 people in Charlotte to supply these cables. So this is just a couple examples. I'd also add that we talk about energy. Meta has committed to unlocking 6.6 gigawatts of power. This is mainly through deals with Oklo, but they've also invested in Vistra, who operates 3 nuclear power plants, 2 of which are in Ohio. They're actually upgrading all the equipment in these nuclear power plants, and they're going to get the access capacity that this new equipment generates. So what are some challenges that we have with data centers? These are the typical ones that we talk about. We've already talked about water usage. I won't go too deep into this other than the fact that a lot of the data centers we're working with now, we actually are representing a few data centers, they're predominantly looking at closed loop systems. So they're not even going to use as much water. They'll use as much water as a warehouse will now if they're using a closed loop system. They basically truck in water. It's ionized water. It has to be trucked in. It goes into their system. They use it for 3 to 5 years. Then they take the water out. They'll have a truck come in and bring in more water for them. But that's a highly, can be cost prohibitive, but a lot of data centers are starting to use that system because of either the lack of water or concerns from the communities. So that's one thing. Electric usage, we talked a little bit about that as well. I think we'll talk about that more in a minute, but I can tell you the new trend is most of the data centers that we're working with are bringing behind-the-meter solutions. Ohio passed House Bill 15, which allowed for the expansion of a definition of behind-the-meter power. And most of the data centers that we're working with are actually bringing in either gas-fired power plants or they're bringing in hydrogen fuel cells. And so those are 2 of the proven technologies, and they're basically bringing them in, and they are supplying their own power for the most part. And quite frankly, I think a lot of them are doing this through power purchase agreements. So basically, they are providing the funding and the commitment to buy electricity for a 10 or 15-year period. After that time, there's a good chance that that facility actually could then be feeding the grid and be providing electricity for a consumer as well. So that's one thing. Noise. I'd also add light pollution here as well. I should change this slide. Those are 2 common issues. And data centers have come a long way, but they can still produce noise. They still produce light. And there are ways, though, that communities can control the decibel levels. New Albany, Ohio, which I think probably has the most data centers of any place in Ohio, probably maybe more than anywhere in the Midwest, quite frankly, is a small community. They have a sound ordinance that says the noise level at the border of the property cannot exceed the traffic noise. one that wasn't in compliance. They're working to get it in compliance, or maybe it is in compliance now, but it had a bad air system that was installed. And so, but they're all in compliance with that. And I can tell you how they get in compliance with that. This is actually a data center in New Albany, and this doesn't look like a data center that was built in 2016 when AWS first started coming to the market. This is the newest technology. You'll notice that everything is walled off. These are all sound walls, sound barriers, and that's how they're doing it. It's a zoning issue. It's a code issue. So I'm just saying that you can actually mandate sound ordinances that can be complied with by data centers. If you don't have a sound ordinance, they're probably not going to go to this level to make sure that they're mitigating sound noise. So I want to talk about how you develop a win-win scenario for data centers. And I wanted to just kind of go through our system and the things that we look at when we're working for a community or a data center. And so first is going to be the land income value tax, which I'll get more of that. Obviously there's property tax payments, there's pilot payments as well, payment in lieu of taxes, if you're not familiar with that term. There's jobs and income taxes generated. And then obviously it all culminates into what we call a community benefit agreement. This goes beyond what a typical development agreement is. This gets into much more detail of the project, and it gets a lot more opportunity for a community to potentially leverage a data center's willingness to invest in the community. So what's land increment tax? Now again, this is data from Central Ohio. I can tell you that based on a study from Jones Lang LaSalle, one of our corporate real estate agents, the average data center price in Central Ohio for a land is $300,000 to $400,000 per acre. That land is mostly, not always, but even if it's developer owned, they have agricultural land. It is generating between $50 and $100 per acre. Once that land transacts, regardless of the property tax abatement, in Ohio, you can't abate the value of the land. You can only abate the value of the improved structure. So if they're putting a building on it, they're going to get an abatement on that. But they're not going to be paying the taxes on the $300,000 to $400,000 per acre. So that goes from $50 to $100 to $3,500 to $4,000 per acre generated for the school districts and the township or whoever receives the property tax allocation. Typically, about the school districts gets between 70 to 85% of those resources. Income tax, data centers do not create a lot of jobs, and I'll talk a minute about how you typically address that with a community benefit agreement. But they do create a lot of construction jobs. A great example is, I think Turner Construction has been on the Meta site in New Albany now for 8 or 9 years. They've had a constant crew on that site just building, and they constantly are building. And so that's a significant benefit to that community because every single construction worker has to pay the local income tax of where they're working, not where they're from, not where their company's from, but where they're actually on the job site. So it can be a significant revenue generator. Data centers do create jobs as well. It's typically 20 to 50 per shell. And if you think about this is hyperscaler type data centers, 20 to 50 jobs per shell, and they can have another 20 to 50 contractors per shell. So if you have like 4 or 5 shells, you might have anywhere from 160 to maybe 400 jobs on that site. Typically, they are $85,000 to $100,000 jobs across the board, and that includes the contractors as well. So it's not a bad generation of income tax. But this is where community benefit agreement comes in. A lot of communities have aspirations to have more jobs created at a site. And let's say you have a 400-acre site and you anticipate recruiting manufacturing there, and you're going to have 4 manufacturers, and you would expect each of them to have 500 employees. That's 2,000 employees. You're not going to have anywhere near that with a data center. The data center comes in. But in your community benefit agreement, you can actually tell the company that we want the revenues that would be generated if we had 2,000 manufacturing jobs there. And so we're going to give you credit for every single income tax dollar you generate, but you have to meet this minimum payment if you don't reach this goal. which they're not going to reach if they're going to be living on a payment. You can either do it as a pilot payment directly to the city council or village council. You can do it as an NCA charge, a new community authority charge. There's all kinds of ways that you can adjust this. This is why New Albany, quite frankly, has been open to data centers. They have a new community authority charge, and it is generating tremendous amounts of revenue for that city. And so that's one of the reasons that they're pro data center. So I want to conclude, this is the typical terms. This is not all of the terms, but this is the typical terms that could be included in a community benefit agreement. And it's everything from capital investment, employment, payroll, a site plan and infrastructure, the provision of power. That's something you don't find in a development agreement. You can actually determine how they're going to bring power to the site, what they're going to pay for, what they're not going to pay for, who's going to pay for it, all can be defined in a community benefit agreement. This is a binding document, by the way. Environmental permitting, they'll basically tell you they need their permits, but you can actually tell them that they need to monitor. They need to monitor their water discharge. And that's something that they're doing in some sites. Some sites they're not, but those sites they are monitoring. So that's something you can do as well. And obviously, if they're going to do a on-site power, there's all sorts of additional studies that need to be done, which you can actually request. You can do, property tax abatement. You can do TIFs. You can do NCAs. Joint economic development districts are another tool that are used. Port authority financing could be used as well, so you can generate revenue for your port authority through the port authority tax exemption. And obviously, you need to do an ROI or a return on investment study, or we also call them economic impact statements, which we do for a lot of companies and communities, and then general contract terms. So these are the components that typically go into a data center. And I can tell you, this has changed significantly, I would say, over the past 2 or 3 years. 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't have conversations about community benefit agreements. We talked about traditional development agreements, what the community was going to do as it relates to a property tax abatement, what kind of pilot payments we made to the schools. But it was really, I think, the innovation that some of the Central Ohio communities came up with, these CBAs, to really start to maximize the value they can get out of a data center, because it became much more competitive. The sites became much more competitive. So when you think about the land income tax, it's going to generate significant amounts of revenue. The fact that you can offset the lack of income tax generation, these deals can actually be lucrative for a community if they want it, if they're right for the community. If they're not right for the community, that's completely okay. And I would say, you can do a referendum, you can do a special use case for zoning, all sorts of things to protect your community if you don't want data centers. And you can also put it in your zoning directly. So there's just things we're dealing with. I would just conclude with, I thought I had a slide in here, I apparently didn't. But there was a study, a survey done by Gallup in March of this year. Business Insider just published an article on that. And this is to give you some context to what we're dealing with as it relates to community. I understand the community sentiment is not on the side of data centers. 71% of those polled did not want a data center in their community. 54% didn't want a nuclear reactor in their community. So data centers have a worse reputation right now than nuclear reactors. And so I think that that's kind of a telling story of where we are. And I think it's also a telling story of how we have to go an extra mile when we want to get these deals done with communities. So with that, I'll conclude and take questions after.
Just in case you need a break, we are going to take about a 5-minute break after our next speaker, just to sort of transition to our panel discussion. But just so you know, there is a restroom out the door to the left, right over this way. If you do have any questions that come up, there's still some boxes and cards in the back of the room and out in the hall that you can write down some cards, but we have quite a few of them already. Our last speaker is Dale Arno. He is the Director of Energy, Utility, and Local Government Policy for the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. For close to 4 decades, he has managed technical assistance projects addressing energy generation, transmission, and distribution issues, as well as associated industrial development and power siting in rural neighborhoods. Dale works with utilities, energy service providers, regulators, local governments, and community stakeholders to identify and include quality of life benefits and stipulations on power siting proceedings at state and federal levels. Dale has authored Farm Bureau policy papers advocating a diversified energy portfolio using domestic fossil resources, renewable and nuclear technologies. He's a graduate of Ohio Dominican University, where he earned a BA degree in communications in 1982. Dale is a native of Knox County, Ohio, where his family can trace their involvement in Ohio agriculture, going back, he told me, to a couple of ancestors who got a land grant for serving in the War of 1812. Dale Arnold.
He's gonna have to use the podium. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. This is the start of a conversation. I don't want you to drink from fire hose. I'm not going to go over everything you need to know in 20 minutes. Me, this is my phone number, this is my email. I've been with the Tuscarawas County Farm Bureau on a number of other related projects over the last 25 to 40 years, 10 to 15 times doing briefings and different things. As I said, this is the start of the conversation. Let's continue the conversation. A number of things are going on. Welcome to Ohio. As a matter of fact, congratulations, welcome aboard. I'm glad you're here because you're going to be finding out you're very much involved in community planning and in the energy development process around data centers. A number of things are happening. Most of these pictures basically are from Ohio. What you learn working with one energy development project is going to serve you extremely well when you have to start working on another one within a decade. And that's happened here. A number of things are happening. And I'll tell you this too, there's a picture there. People ask me what's local electricity. Local electricity is a PJM interconnection network. That is a 14-state network of power generation and transmission assets and local distribution companies. Electricity is a commodity. It's bought and sold on a daily basis on commodity exchanges, just like corn, wheat, and beans, because I did it. I can tell you exactly where that particular electricity is coming from in most parts of the day and its origins in this. Local electricity is not done here in Tuscarawas County. It's part of this entire system, and you're part of it. Same with natural gas. That's a natural gas transmission system that is nationwide, and gas travels both ways. When you're using natural gas for cooking or for home heating or different things with your local utility, you are part of that particular process. That's local gas. There's a number of energy-related projects on there that you are intimately involved with. Everything from compact nuclear, and yes, it's here in Ohio, to oil and gas production, pipelines, transmission lines, heavy industrial power generating and siting. A number of things are happening, and consequently, you're being asked to be involved in this process. I get where you're coming from. When you're talking to basically an energy service provider or a developer of a data center, out of every 5, maybe 1 to 1.5 understand and appreciate that and will attempt to work with communities. The others, they don't. And we understand that too. The focus needs to become, if we're talking about any type of energy development project there, any type of industrial project and different things there, We need to start talking about this has to be a strategic partnership. Tuscarawas County is as individual as a fingerprint. You have unique needs, you have a unique community here, and you also have the tools to be able, when a developer comes here, instead of them dictating terms and conditions, you can talk with them, and if you plan right, in many of those plans, you need to think about things because the immediate now time frame is a 30-year time block, and going out that far, that's where the discussion comes. Is farm ground precious? You bet it is. Is open space precious? You bet it is. And consequently, you need to be part of the process with regard to that. We're talking here about a balance. When it comes to energy development, moratorium is not an option. Doing things with a popularity contest is not an option. If we worked on moratoriums only and popularity contests to keep things out or in, we'd all be sitting in the cold and in the dark. That's what's going on, and what you need to take a look at. Permits. Yes, I work with a lot of data center folks, and they always say, I already got my permit. Go away. I want you to think about this. We're talking about different types of permit. Let's talk about brick and mortar permits. Yes, these companies are going to be building buildings, and they're going to be using the same permit structure that you would use to build a house, a farm building, a commercial building downtown, a strip mall, a mercantile or factory, a large warehouse. That's a brick and mortar permit. That's pretty easy to get. But what we need to tell folks basically is this: there is more to this type of development than a brick and mortar permit to build a building. You might not have much to say because of the regulatory approach of building a building, but you have a tremendous amount of opportunities, and I would say responsibilities, when it comes to other things connected with them. Utility power cycle. Both of your speakers talked about those. I live in Licking County. We have 3 data centers. We have 3 combined cycle natural gas-fired turbine generation stations under development, and over 60 miles of pipelines with natural gas supply to feed them. We have transmission lines and different things being planned with regard to that. I'm working a lot with local government leaders, township trustees, county commissioners, farmers, community stakeholders, and say, what do we do to get involved with this process? You already have the options with regard to that. Welcome to the Ohio Power Siting Board. I want you to think about this. Ohio Power Siting Board is that part of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio that, if you're taking a look at a power generation asset, if you're taking a look at a pipeline, if you're taking a look at a transmission line, over 50 megawatts of capacity, they're jurisdictional authority. I want you to think of this as a court of law. The permit itself is evidence. County commissioners, township trustees, and city fathers have automatic right of intervention, working with their county prosecutor, city prosecutors, or legal counsel. Automatic party of record to be involved in those judicial proceedings, to create, present evidence, examination, cross-examination, taking a look at and negotiating settlements and agreements and stipulations on behalf of the people that they serve. Also, you as community stakeholders have the ability to organize, have your own legal counsel, and also be involved in that particular process. You're looking for a seat at the table. This is where it's at. Welcome to my world. And I'm going to tell you this. People ask me, Farm Bureau policy, are you for this project or against it in our county? I'm neither for or against, because you need to be involved and you need to help making decisions. this process. Uniform system of rule, regulation, law in all 88 counties, all 1,500 plus townships, and I help people on both sides of the aisle get involved with regard to that. As a matter of fact, when I walk into a hearing room, if half the people there see me as a guardian angel, and the other half see me as a devil incarnate, I know I'm doing my job. That's the part there. Things to think about. There are 7 codicils that have to be addressed before the Power Siting Board says, yes, we're going to give you a permit to support this project with utility infrastructure. Only 2 have to do with utility infrastructure. The type of facility and the pigtail, where you're going to hook it in. The other 5 have to do with quality of life provisions for that community. Previous speaker talked about those. Those are all up for negotiation. Welcome to power siting in the state of Ohio. That's what it's about. And people are saying, when did we get that in the Ohio General Assembly? When did we get that in the law? 1963. You've had it for a long time. However, you've never had somebody talk to you and explain that or had the opportunity to get involved with it. You have that now. You have that responsibility with regard to that. If you're talking about preservation of farm ground, if you're talking about preservation as a community, if you're talking about striking a balance between economic development, power siting, and the unique needs of our community, that's what that process is about. That's why it's there. That's why it's been there since 1963. That's why you have the opportunity and the responsibility to get involved with regard to this. If you're looking for a popularity contest or some sort of petition drive, or you want to make somebody's life a living hell so they go away, that's not going to work all the time. As I said, you're going to see a lot of different development projects come here. They're all going to use that process. You need to be prepared. You need to be educated. You need to share experience, and you need to be involved in that process. It's governed by the state of Ohio. As I said, it's a adjudicatorial process. It coordinates a statewide system. It is the judge, jury, and executioner. 2 administrative law judges with the power of judge in the state of Ohio administer that casework. All permits are a matter of public record. They're evidence in the proceedings. You have right to examination, cross-examination, stipulations. You have the right to look at all reports and different things, and it's rather easy to get. You can create your own subscription service to the document information system. See them, download them, use them as much as you want, talk with your friends and neighbors and different things. Why am I telling you this? I help Farm Bureau members do that. I'm a veteran of over 125 power siting cases in the state of Ohio. Welcome to my work. I also want you to think about this. You might not be working on permitting things 50 megawatts or above, which means your work is going to be on how well you use that process. That's what I'm here to help people do. There's going to be some instances where someone's going to talk to you about a community scale power generation project under 50 megawatts. House Bill 501 was passed several years ago, and it said if there is a project that cannot come under Ohio Power Siting Board jurisdiction, we, quote, confer power siting authority to county and township government. I'm working with county and township governments all over the state of Ohio because they're saying, Dale, what in the sand is power siting? Helping them understand and appreciate that. Now, I also need to tell you this. How many townships basically are zoned in Tuscarawas County? 3. And I've been to all 3. If you don't have zoning, you don't have this option. Land use planning is huge. If you're talking about land preservation, if you're talking about natural resource preservation, if you're talking about quality of life, if you're talking about provisions that you want to have in each and every type of power siting process that comes here, you need to put together your plans. And let me tell you something, an energy service provider, the immediate now time frame is a 30-year time block. They're thinking out that far. You need to see the same thing too. Who needs to do that? Local government officials, community stakeholders, farmers, businessmen, people who have a stake in this county need to be at that table. Because you're going to be using it a lot from this point forward. Individuals are being asked about a number of things. I'm almost done.
Thank God.
And for the guy who's shooting his mouth off, you better take good notes, because I expect to see you at other educational meetings for you to understand and appreciate what's going on. Now then, many individual landowners are going to be asked basically to accommodate a number of things. You're hearing a lot about leases. You're hearing a lot about easements. You're hearing a lot about surface agreements. Those are individual legal documents. They are between an energy service provider and an individual landowner. There's no such thing as a group easement, a group service agreement, a group lease. Education and outreach is huge. Luckily, you have several attorneys in our network who understand and appreciate the gravity of those negotiations. If you're being impacted by taking a look at possibly accommodating some of this on property in your community, and these terms come up, the government is not going to be able to help you. You're going to have to work on those things. You are going to have to negotiate those things. You are going to have to hire legal counsel to represent and work with you. We do that too.
You and we.
Almost done. I guess what we're saying is this: a number of things are going to be happening in this county from this point forward. Some service providers are going to be easy to work with. Others are not. Knowledge is power. Do you think they all know this? They do. Do you know it? You're starting to see some of it right now, which means you need to continue education, discussion, planning, taking a look at this. We need to continue the conversation so you can have an equal seat and equal terms and conditions at that particular table. Who needs to be at that table? We're talking about coordinated efforts involving the developer, government and regulatory agencies, township, county, state, in some cases federal level economic development folks, regional development authorities, and community groups of stakeholders and citizens need to be there. When you look at creation and development of projects that address environmental and safety concerns, consider aesthetic needs, and provide economic benefits to your community. That's what this is about. That's how power siting was created in 1963. And I invite you to investigate more with regard to that. Now you know what Craig Butler was working on basically with the power siting group. I invite you to explore this more, and I invite you to continue the conversation. I'm also going to say this. You need to start thinking well into the future. In 1926, if we were in this room, we would be talking about the Muskingum Valley Conservancy District. You ought to read the history there, because many of them are saying, you're going to build a series of dams, you're going to build lakes, what's going to happen to those towns and communities? What's going to happen to the farms? What's going to happen to the open space? I was impacted by that. My family's from Coshocton County, from Bedford and Newcastle Township. He didn't tell you this, but there's a dam there called Mohawk Dam on the Wahunding watershed. It's a dry dam. It's built for flooding emergencies. You should have heard and read about what people thought about the Muskingum Valley Conservancy District. They were the devil incarnate. It's interesting how people start discussing and start seeing value in something. Mohawk Dam is over 100 years old and needs to be refitted. You don't hear anybody over there talking about removing Mohawk Dam. They're talking about how do we refit that to continue the benefits that we're seeing further down the Wahunding watershed all the way to the shop. Things have a tendency to change. People started looking long term. I'm not saying that's the same thing with the data center, but we need to explore that also. We need to find a balance, and you need to understand you've already got a seat at the table if you exercise using it. And we at Farm Bureau would love to show you how. I thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you to our three speakers. In the sake of time, we're going to take a 2-minute break so we can rearrange up here. If you need to take a stretch your legs, take a restroom break, do it quickly, please.
All right, before we start the panel discussion, I just want to plug, on the heels of what Dale was saying, I want to plug the fact that we're getting ready to do comprehensive land use planning. We have a ODA grant that we've received funding to do comprehensive land use planning, and as you said, this is something that you do maybe once every 30 years. And it's extremely important that we get our township trustees, our municipalities involved in that comprehensive land use planning process. So that's coming, it's on the way, it's on the agenda for the Planning Commission. So if you are a local elected official and you want to be a part of that process, we want you a part of that process. With that said, thank you to our speakers for coming here tonight. And while we can't answer every question about data centers, we've got a lot. We're going to try to cover as much ground as we can with the time that we have. So I'm going to jump right into a question that was actually sent to me by the mayor of Philadelphia. Why are data centers necessary? Why are they critical to our future? And I think Matt touched on this quite a bit, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Why do we need them?
All right. Well, I mean, I think that my slide that talked about the uses kind of approached this topic. So I don't want to spend too much time here, but you know, they are every day. Everyone uses a data center, and it's you know, beyond the social media, though. I like to take it beyond that, beyond the streaming videos, streaming services, because I think that that's where people don't really go often. We talked about things like, one thing we can talk about is who uses Uber Eats? You know, that GPS, you know, how they know how to get to your house? Data center. You know, so those are just everyday examples. Some of them are luxuries, obviously, but there are things like I mentioned with my chart that are changing the way that doctors operate, changing the speed of drug discovery. Those are all real issues, and that's something that is not just a data center. The drug discovery is all AI. AI needs data centers to operate. So like I said, every community is not right for a data center, just like every data center is not right for a community. But if you are open to it, there are ways to leverage that investment, so it's a huge financial benefit for a community as well. So I'd say that's the secondary benefit. Besides the citizens are using, they actually can create tremendous amounts of revenue for a community.
Very good. So for Dale, I'm going to ask you, is local zoning the most effective tool to prevent data centers if a community decides they don't want them?
Yes, I would say this. House Bill 510, 4 years ago, if you have zoning, it gave county commissioners and township trustees, it conferred power siting authority just the same as the Ohio Power Siting Board. And I've been working with a lot of local governments, including twice today and 3 times yesterday, bringing them up to speed on how that works. Many of you are familiar with zoning. Zoning does certain steps and degrees, basically, of planning. But a lot of your local government officials are finding this out. Zoning doesn't cover everything you need to plan and take a look at with regard to a data center or many of the technologies I saw here. If you have power siting, and we also do this too, I work with a lot of local governments showing them these are the principles of power siting and different things which are different, might complement, or you might need to think about this with regard to zoning. If and when Energy Development Company comes to your local township trustee meeting or the local county commissioners under Ohio open meeting law and says we're interested basically in doing a project here, your first response should be after the meeting, how the Sam hell do we do that? You would say, well, that's great, because here is what we worked out with our planning folks. Here basically is our power siting principles. Here are the things basically that we want to have in this process, and you're going to need to follow if, in the future, we're going to do a consideration to bring you in or not. That's part of the partnership.
Yeah, so following up, I hear a lot of people say, I vote no for data centers. In effect, are you saying if you want to vote no to data centers, you need to vote yes for planning?
Well, I would also say this too. Some people think about something quick, easy, simple, and painless. let's just put a moratorium in it. You need to understand this. County commissioners, township trustees, that's a government entity. They have to give a very good and just reason for their decisions. I've worked with a lot of them. Yes, many of them are being faced very quickly about evaluating a number of things for a data center, an energy project, a number of things we've talked about here. Voting a moratorium instantly like that, it's not going to take long for a company to say, you voted a moratorium in, why? If you do not have a definite legal and logical reason for that, what's going to happen is this. You're going to be challenged because any decision you make is appealable, amendable, and challengeable in a court of law. And you want to spend a lot of money on roads and bridges and improvements in the township or a legal defense. What you need to think about basically is this, and I've worked with a lot of folks who are faced with that at a meeting. Tell them this. Table that motion. How many of you guys were in FFA remember parliamentary procedure? Now you know why we teach that. Table the motion. Tell them there's a number of things we need to investigate here. What are the legal rights and responsibilities? What are the community benefits? We need to find and get feedback from a number of the folks that we represent, and that's going to take time. And so our motion is to table consideration on this until further time when we can do that research and render a decision. You table a motion, it's neither appealable or amendable, and it gives you time to do a number of things. Well, you'll have to work through him, ma'am, okay? And I'll see you afterwards, too. Okay? Great. God love you. Sure.
So when you talk about like a moratorium, there are other tools that you can do. You can do a conditional use, which basically allows the data center by zoning, but it requires them to go through a special community group. And they're going to have to explain, why they're going to do it. And it basically results into a CDA that meets the community's, needs. And so it's an extra step they have to go through. It's also called sometimes special use in some states, but Ohio calls it conditional use. And that's just another tool that you can put in place that any time a data center would come in, it's a conditional use approval.
Yeah. Building upon what you said, again, welcome to community development and planning. That's part of it. In working with county commissions and township trustees, God bless them. I come from a century of service with my ancestors being both. Having our leaders take a look at, having our leaders to be educated, having our leaders to work with the Ohio Township Association, the County Commissioners Association of Ohio. I've spoken and done teaching at both of their sessions. I just got done with the State Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. And I just got done basically with the National Association of Utility Commissioners on those processes. This is rather new. This is, for a lot of folks, unexplored territory. Understanding your rights and abilities and responsibilities towards that is huge. Our folks want a seat at the table. Our focus is to show them how to be involved as an effective negotiator, an effective representative of you, and an effective person who is going to advocate a partnership here.
Okay, Craig, you being kind of the water guy. The Ohio EPA is considering allowing data center runoffs into our waterways. What kind of safeguards are needed to protect our local streams and ditches from elevated temperatures? And I have to ask about chemicals. A lot of people are skeptical about that discharge. Are there chemicals? So one, what kind of safeguards do we need? And two, what's in the water?
Yeah, good question. And I think it'll actually pick up on what Dale has talked about from the Power Siting Board. So I would just reiterate the idea that a permit, regulatory approval, water use, water discharge is no different. And so when data center company X, power producer X comes and said they need a brick and mortar permit to build, they also need environmental permits to do that too. And so they would approach and the Environmental Protection Agency, talk about what that is, and they would end up getting a permit. And this is where you also, as Dale would say, you as the public have an opportunity to be part of that process. It's as much a participatory process as the Power Siting Board is. Draft permits are issued based on technical information, actually inviting the public to participate in that process, asking for a public hearing, attending a public hearing, submitting written comments for consideration that have to be considered in the consideration as the director makes a decision on a permit. So I think as much as power siting, as much as community benefit agreements, there are so many opportunities where government just begs the citizens to actually participate in the process, and they don't do it. And so, from a chemical perspective, so where the permits come in, or information comes in from a data center, or it could be any particular manufacturing operation that will discharge, that will use water and ask for permission to discharge that into the state waters of the state of Ohio. This is a very specific evaluation. There are general permits that get issued for rather small kinds of operations, and in some cases data center discharge. But there's a lot of evaluation that goes on, very specific. It's like data center X wants to locate here, they're going to use this much water, they're going to use these kinds of additives and chemicals and biocides and whatever they're going to use to protect that water while it's going through the system. But eventually they have to discharge some of that. That is where then EPA takes a look at all of the chemical components of that, looks at the water in that stream, say, is it big enough? Is there enough assimilative capacity in there to not cause degradation to the stream or the aquatic life or the benthic life in the stream? And if there is that an acceptable degradation? It's called an anti-degradation review. And after all of that chemical analysis and all of the biological analysis, the director of EPA needs to make a decision on that permit to say, is there an impact, number one? If there is an impact, is it an acceptable impact based on what the project is? Will I issue a permit? Will I issue it as a draft permit? And then will I ask, when the public asks for a public hearing, public information, will we come to the community and have that? So there are, Ohio is one of the national leaders in stream quality, water quality assessment. We wrote the book, literally, in the 1970s, that the rest of the country uses on stream evaluation, stream identification, and evaluation of chemical and biological impacts to streams in the state of Ohio.
Sure. It's a case-by-case basis?
It's
what you're saying?
It's a project-by-project evaluation.
Okay, a lot of thought goes into it. Okay. So, a lot of concerns, I'll just throw this at all three of you, about the jobs, the permanent jobs. Some people believe that these are jobs that they're going to bring outsiders in to do these permanent jobs. So what kind of opportunities are there to collaborate with local education partners to make sure that those opportunities are being filled by local people?
I can start there. Welcome to Power Siting. As I said, only two have to do with technical capabilities of a power plant or a transmission system. The other five are quality of life. One of those that you have the ability to negotiate is this type of community benefit. I've seen stipulations put in individual permits. This is our career school. This is our technical center. This is our local branch of the college and different things. Let's talk about job training. We want to have some idea about how many jobs you're bringing in, and consequently, you're going to focus with our curriculum and our faculty to train our kids to do that. You also need to tell us about other economic things that are happening with that too, because a data center or some other type of facility coming in, that's a tip of the iceberg. You're going to be seeing a number of other things with regard to jobs and different things. Same thing with regard to power siting. You're going to be working with our local schools, the technical center, the local college. The training's going to be done here, and the jobs and the recruiting is going to be done here. That's in the permit.
Oh, okay. I'll give some very tangible examples. Amazon Web Services has a fiber splicing program that they have with poles. vocational school. They offer the program free of charge for any high school students at Tolles and also the adult learners that are at Tolles. And so if you have a fiber splice, it's a certification that you get, which then enables you to work inside of a data center, or for a company like AT&T that might be laying fiber. You have all kinds of options once you have got the certification. Mentioned the Owens Corning. That's because there is a massive amount of fiber optics that go into a data center. And so, that's one just example. There are, AWS also does think spaces, typically in the local school district where they have operations. These are STEM-focused education programs, and they outfit the space with latest technologies. Hilliard has a great example of that. They have like 3 campuses with AWS, and their spaces are amazing in their schools. So they're planting the seeds for opportunities with high school kids. They're actually providing tangible certifications in many cases so that people can actually get jobs in the data centers, or they are transferable skills, like these certifications where they can take it on the road and they can work anywhere in the country they want, quite frankly, with the fiber splicing certification.
I might have to, this is not my area, but I think about this question, and it's almost a devil's advocate kind of answer. So we've heard about the potential, even with tax abatements, for the amount of revenue that a data center can generate for a community. I think that's undeniable. They don't generate a significant amount of jobs. That actually may be to somewhat a degree of a benefit if you're careful on the tax abatement perspective. You're then bringing in a significant source of revenue with not a lot of additional people to put really demands on your social service. Roads, bridges, police, fire, and other sorts of social service, schools. And so I think if you're careful with how you work the community benefits agreements and you work your tax abatements, you can generate a significant amount of revenue that would make up for some of the lost revenue that you had bigger job employments. And then, as Dale mentioned, you do have the ancillary jobs that come along with it that are part of the equation, not just the data center, but the jobs that come along with it. So it is the balance that you need to be careful.
One last thing, building on what they said everything and anything is negotiable. Say you find through your community planning that you were talking about, this are the focus points for our community, and this is where we need employees, this is where we need education. It might not be with that particular person or entity, but they are here. You're talking about pilot payments, payment in lieu of taxes to your schools and your local government. Everything and anything is negotiable. The focus is what we're doing here with a number of things, and you need to provide the resources so we can do that training too. We've actually had communities who have negotiated in agreements. We're very much involved in agriculture. You're going to be doing these things with agribusiness. You're going to be doing these things with soil and water conservation. You're going to be doing these things with agricultural engineering, because we have a lot of kids who want to stay on the farm, and we need to have those resources. You're here in the community. You're going to support that.
Yeah, I think we're just about at our time limit. I'm going to throw one more question at you. It's about preserving small town culture, and how do local leaders balance a farmer's right to sell and release their land with the community's desire to preserve their rural character?
That's interesting, because welcome to my world. You take a look at policy, you take a look at balance. Everyone has the right to use their property as they see fit, sell it as they see fit. But we're also talking here about community planning. Welcome to that, because that's new territory. That's unexplored territory. That's discussion that economic development people need to be involved in, and that also needs to be the subject of what you're talking about here, my friend. And now you know and understand why you want to have a farmer on that committee.
Yeah. And just one more time, I want to plug the fact that the Planning Commission recently received a $50,000 grant from the Ohio Department of Agriculture to do comprehensive land use planning. We are about to publish a request for proposals to start that process, and we encourage encourage all the townships, all the municipalities to be involved in that process. So, with that said, thank you again to our panelists, our partners, and everyone in the audience for making tonight a success. And hopefully some of these guys will stick around if you have any further questions.